I'm so excited to be here today, and I wanted to thank all of you for taking time to be here today. Thank you. My talk today is going to be on Shahnameh, the Iranian national epic, and I'll be discussing through the medium of Shahnameh some very unique aspects of Iranian identity. The format of my presentation, it's going to be through three versions of Shahnameh. The first version is Shahnameh manuscript, the original stories of Shahnameh. And through this format, the Iranian identity can be defined as Persian and Zoroastrian. The second format is miniature illustrations or illumination of Shahnameh, which was done in 15th to 17th century during Safavid dynasty. And this format shows the Iranian identity as Persian and Shia Islam. The last format is Shahnameh comic books, which in the format of comic book, it shows Iranian identity as Iranian, American, and the global identity. And also, I'll be talking about through miniature illustrations of Shahnameh, some of them that you saw during your museum tour. I'm going to be discussing the cultural influences in this period, time period from 15th to 17th century through the miniature and also architecture. Specifically influences between Iran, India, and China through the medium of miniature. My goal and challenge for this presentation is for my text to become, my talk to be a text to the exhibition which you already seen. And my objectives for today's talk are define Shahnameh, list the three version formats of Shahnameh, why should we study Shahnameh, analyze the three layers of Iranian identity, and explore the cultural influences between various cultures and their interactions through miniature illustrations. So I'd like to start by asking this question, what is Shahnameh? And I would like to open this discussion and ask you that to share with us in your own way, from your culture and tradition that you're coming from. When you think of epic, what images conjures up in your mind? I'd like to hear some of your responses, if anyone wants to share. Yes? Gilgamesh comes to your mind. Yes. Any other thoughts? Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, so these are some of the Iliad and, Odyssey, and Gilgamesh, of course. These are some, yes? Oh, okay, yes, all that, yes. And yes.
So in the Chinese literature, we have the Three Kingdom rising story, and also the Red Chamber Dreams and Monkey Kings travel to the west. So those are three that come to my mind.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Yes, and in Iran, the Iranian national epic is called Shahnameh, and which means in Farsi, the official language of Iran, Book of Kings. So, and then a work of epic, just as in Shahnameh and as well as other epics, they're based on people's collective, our ancestors' collective memories, and they're very endearing to people of that culture. And in Shahnameh, it's the original manuscript of Shahnameh. It was based on the collective memory of Iranian in pre-Islam. And the stories they dealt with, they were about the kings and heroes of Iran. Now I wanted to show the map of Iran and just go over maybe some areas that have been, they're more well-known than other areas. So the capital, of course, is, let's see here. Capital Tehran, and yeah, right here. And the other important area, Isfahan, that was the capital under Safavid. And the area, the province that is mentioned in Shahnameh is Khurasan. That's where Ferdowsi was from. The other important area that is worth mentioning is Fars here, or as it was also called Parsa, and as it's written by Greek historians as Persia was the center of the Achaemenid Empire. These are some of the areas that have been more well known than other areas. So the epic of Shahnameh stories and their local heroes, they lived in northwestern eastern area of Iran. And also, so now that we have the map of Iran, wanted to talk about the people of Iran, the languages and the Iranian ethnicity. Majority of Iranians, they are, I mean, the race of Iranians is Aryan, and Iran, the name Iran, it means the land of Aryans. And the language of Aryans was, they are Indo-European and Indo-Iranian languages. Now, among the different tribes of Aryans, Persian, they're under the Achaemenids, they rose to power. And as I mentioned, their center was in the southwest of Iran. And also the name of the Iranian language, Persian or Farsi, or Parsi is actually the name of the language in Persian, but it was changed to Farsi after Islam was entered in Iran. In Arabic language, there is no P sound, so it was Parsa was changed to Farsi. This is the image, a miniature image from Shahnameh that, again, it's, when we look at this, we can see many, probably, you know, because it's miniature, we can see some elements from different Eastern cultures in this image. But it was the site that usually the king, you know, along with his musicians, it was a form of entertainment, and the setting that Shahnameh recitals or poetry was performed. Also, in back then, another form of entertainment was because it was recited the stories. Maybe it was more like a passion play and more animated type of storytelling, but it was performed in this type of setting. So we also see the Persian writing, calligraphy here, and that's an example of miniature illustration of Shahnameh. Shahnameh was composed by Ferdowsi, Abul Qasim Ferdowsi, who lived from 980 CE to 1010. And during this time, Iran was ruled by Arab Caliphate Abbasid. And Ferdowsi's time period corresponded to the kingdom of, they were provincial kings, Samanids and Ghaznavid. And Ferdowsi was commissioned by Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi to compose the book of Shahnameh. The stories now, however, Ferdowsi, he didn't create the stories. They were handed down to him they were in oral traditions, and they were all handed down to him. His family, he came from a family of Dehqan, and they were like village lords, and they were in charge of gathering the stories of oral tradition. The Samanid times that I mentioned in 9th century, during their time, the Persian cultural renaissance was accomplished. They were Samanid kings. Their capital was in Bukhara, which is not in Iran now. It's, I believe, in Uzbekistan. And that was the center of trade and science. Samanids, they were very interested in promoting Persian language and culture, and the language of their court became Farsi. So this was the environment that Ferdowsi was living under, and in Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi time, he finished the writing of Shahnameh. It took like Ferdowsi 30 years to finish Shahnameh, and it's a book of, it's a very large book of poetry. It has more than 50,000 couplet verses, and as far as in terms of size, it's considered comparable to Mahabharata and Ramayana. The landscape of Shahnameh is to demonstrate the multi-ethnic aspect of Iranian population. And Ferdowsi, through these stories, he was able to thread the fabric of Iranian identity, and that's why Shahnameh has been used and is being used as a source for Iranian cultural study. Shahnameh covers the story of Iran from the creation until the fall of Sasanian in 7th century and Arab conquest of Iran. So the worldview of Shahnameh is also Sasanian worldview. And what's important, as Turaj mentioned, was that the religion of Zoroastrian religion became the state religion of Sasanian, and which the important aspect of this religion was duality, good versus evil, and the one God, Ahura Mazda. There was another religion that was gaining popularity under Sasanian, and it was Mencian religion, and it was more, they looked at the notion of duality, but the world affairs and world view and material world became more like Ahriman, and they were really interested in the spiritual realm. Also in politics, in the notion of great king, it was their belief in politics. And the other aspect is royal fare, divine, which is considered, can be defined as divine aura and divine grace, or sometimes divine spirit. Sources of authority also, they were very clearly defined as authority of God, king, and father. And we can see as the emblem of Zoroastrian worldview, as we all saw in that Zoroastrian bull. Just wanted to mention it here. As I mentioned, so it was the end of Sasanian was with Arab conquest of Iran in 640 AD. And after that, Iran was ruled by Arab caliphates. The first one, Umayyads, they ruled from 661 to 750. Their capital was Damascus. Abbasids, they ruled from 750 to 1258. Their capital city was Baghdad. Shahnameh, scholars, for the ease of scholarly studying, they have divided Shahnameh in 3 divisions. The first third is considered mythological. The first king, Qumers, was the first was Adam, and also here we hear there are some kings that are we've heard about them. The other workshop that we had, Jamshid, we heard the story from Lita that she talked about Jamshid as the fire-bearing king, and when he rose, the whole world was in, bright and glossing, and he lost his phare, and that was when Zahak attacked Iran. So these are the kings are in the mythological part of Shahnameh. The second, third is heroic legendary stories. And the heroes are Sam, Zal, Rostam. Rostam is considered to be the greatest hero in the stories of Shahnameh. And Sohrab was Rostam's son. And Siavash, he was also one of the heroes, but he was another type of hero. Not only he had physical prowess, but he also had very high level of conscience. The kings that are mentioned in Shahnameh and in the story of, in miniature illustration, the legend of Siavash is King Kavus. The other king, King Qobad and King Khosrow, Lahrasp and Goshtasp. During the King Goshtasp time, the religion of Zoroastrian came about. The last third of Shahnameh is quite historical, which is the history of Sasanian and also Parthian. And also the tone of Shahnameh changes in the last third portion. It becomes less heroic and more romantic with love stories of some of the Sasanian kings and their hunting games. This image shows Rostam, and he's fighting the monster. And also Rostam's Rakhsh, the Rakhsh had a very special power, and only Rostam was a very wild horse, and only Rostam was able to tame him. There are also major themes in Shahnameh story that I put down here, but by no means these are not, that doesn't mean that these are the only themes. There are a lot more themes. The first one that I put here, phare, I like to call it as is not only one of the themes, but it's the running themes which occurs through many stories of the Shahnameh. Phare, as I mentioned, can be defined as divine glory and spirit, and it was just specific to kings. It wasn't something that you can inherit, and if a king did something immoral and wrong, he would lose his phare. And the belief was that when the king loses his phare, people in Iran, they lose their independence, there is no peace, and that this becomes a ripe environment for foreigners to come and invade Iran, which happened when the stories of Jamshid, that some of you were here last time, that when he lost his phare, when he became too hubris, then Zahak came and attacked, and Iran lost its independence and peace. The second theme, father against son, it's a recurring theme in stories of Shahnameh. The first case, Rostam versus Sohrab, and this is one of the very important and popular, famous story in Shahnameh. It's a tragedy. And the other one, Kavus and Siavash, Esfandiar, and Goshtasp. So we can also think of it when Ferdowsi brings up this theme, it's also to realize in these situations when the fathers, they rise against their sons, the sympathy of Iranian people goes toward the sons. And so maybe we can think of it as Ferdowsi's way of trying to bring it to attention the patriotic aspects of Iranian culture, which is not a virtuous value. In honor, it's a very important theme, and it has been through some of the stories. Foolish King Kavus, he's known as one of the most foolish kings in the stories of Shahnameh. And when a king becomes foolish, also he loses his phare too, as it happened to Kavus. Malicious kings, Goshtas, patriarchy, Iran's independence and sovereignty. So these are some of the themes that we see more and more in Shahnameh stories. why the miniature, like to ask this question, why the miniature version of Shahnameh stories, Shahnameh was so important to Safavid dynasty. Now we have to realize that when Sasanian fell, when they lost control of Iran and Arab conquered Iran, that was the end of Iranian sovereignty for centuries to come. That was 7th century. So from 7th century until 16th century, when Safavids ruled, Iran was under control of Arab caliphates. For Safavid, it was very important and vital that they needed to define their political identity. And the way they decided to define it, it was through the cultural production, such as miniature and architecture. And the Iranian Safavids, they were Shia Muslims. And the founder of Safavid dynasty, Shah Ismail, he officiated the Persian Farsi as the official language of Iran and Shia Islam as the official religion in Iran. So it was through this component that they redefined the Iranian identity. This image is from the legend of Siavash, and it's the cover of book that is translated by Dick Davis. Here, as I mentioned, Siavash was a hero, one of the heroes in the stories of Shahnameh. Now, this miniature illustration has become one of the most reproduced images of Shahnameh. And it's because that through this story, Siavash had to go through the trial of fire to prove his innocence. And then later on, Siavash becomes martyred. It seems that this story was a very demonstrative way of depicting the progression of identity in Iran and religion in Iran from Zoroastrian religion into Shia Islam. It's a very imagery. Some of the images of fire and water, they're refer to sacred elements in Zoroastrian religion. And at the end, when Siavash becomes martyred, Siavash resonates the image of Imam Hussein, the third Shia Imam who was martyred in Karbala. The miniature version of the Shahnameh story, the idea was also, as I mentioned, was to promote national Iranian identity as Shia Islam, as Persian and Persian. This is one of the images from the fire ordeal of Siavash. And Siavash, he wore a knight outfit and his horse is black. And in this miniature also, since I like to bring cultural influences into play, is just these, the flames, they're like dragons. So it's just cultural influence from China. It's apparent in here. And then we see also Islamic in architecture along with Iranian calligraphy. This is also another image. As I mentioned, this was one of the most reproduced image of Shahnameh stories. Next, I wanted to talk about cultural exchanges between Iran, India, and just influences from other cultures through the miniature manuscript. Here, it's this image is from Asian Art Museum, and it's made in India. It's the title is Combat Between the Heroes Barman and Qubad. It's one of the stories in Shahnameh. And so we see that it's based on Shahnameh, but the miniature is Indian, and the manner of presentation and painting, the colors, yellow and red, it's an Indian style of miniature. This is also another miniature manuscript, and it was painted in northern India. This miniature illustration, it was made in Iran, and so it shows Iranian miniature, and usually we can see Iranian miniature, they use the cobalt blue, and of course Farsi calligraphy. This is also another image from Asian Art Museum of Shahnameh that was made in India. Here, the hero Rostam killed the white demon. The white demon was one of the biggest, most gruesome monster in Shahnameh. And these are like the accompanying demons along with the white demon. This one, the hero Rostam and the sorceress, and it was painted in India. Also, we can see in this image, this again from Asian Art Museum, is star-shaped tile, and in the center, it seems that it's the combined image of Simurgh, the mythological bird from Shahnameh, and a dragon from Chinese culture. So we can see cultural influences in this, and also Farsi writing around the margin. Now I'd like to talk about show some cultural exchanges and influences in architecture. This is the architecture, the center, the town center of Safavid Empire under Shah Abbas the Great in Isfahan, Tehran, Iran. And this is another, here there are 4 structures. They're in this square that is called Royal Square or Imam Square in Isfahan. Okay, this one is the Imam Square. I'm sorry, mosque, Imam Mosque. And the image of Shah Abbas the Great. This image is from the Smithsonian, and it shows this is Shah Abbas and also Jahangir King, the Mughal king of India, that they're embracing each other. And then the halo behind them, again, was based on the images that we've seen in Maharaja, the halo, Buddhist emblem, and we can see that also in some of the Shahnameh drawing too. We see that image as halo around the king's head too. This painting is from Asian Art Museum, and it's called Akbarnameh. And also, in addition to cultural influences, sometimes the other culture, if it would help to define the meaning of power. So Akbar, the 3rd emperor in Mughals, he was very interested in Persian culture, and in his court, many Iranian artists, they were employed in his court, and the language of his court was Persian. So also it was important for him ruling in northern India to define his status of power as Indian and also Muslim. And Akbarnameh was definitely inspired by Shahnameh. And again, we can see another influence, cultural influence, and also as far as defining their political identity. These are more images from Akbar. The architectural influences also, as I mentioned, that it was another way of defining for an empire or dynasty to define their power. Safavid architecture was not original. It was considered a revival architecture, and it was in the style of Timurid and also Seljuk. That was another dynasty before Safavid in Isfahan. So when Shah Abbas the Great, he came into power, rather he didn't destroy the old Seljuk square, he just built his more elaborate square next to it in Isfahan. And so Shah Abbas himself was influenced by other architectural styles. And also the other area that we can look at is the influence of Safavid architecture on India. And the example of that is Taj Mahal. In the aspects of reflecting pool, it was the idea originated from Safavid dynasty, one of their monuments in Isfahan. So here's Taj Mahal and Chehel Sotun in Isfahan, the reflective pool. So there are 20 columns, but then with the reflection in water, it makes it 40 columns. So the third, I talked about two versions of Shahnameh. The first, the original manuscript, and then the miniature illustration. The third is the comic books of Shahnameh, Shahnameh comic books. And I have these books here. I think you can buy them in Asian Art Museum bookstore. I'm not sure if they're not here yet, but soon they'll be here. So the idea behind the comic book Shahnameh is that it was meant for Iranian American, the younger generation that was growing up here in America, and they were totally disconnected from their own culture, from Iranian cultural roots, to present a work of Shahnameh in a format that is more understandable to them. And so comic book format is a very familiar format for younger generation growing up here. And so in here we see that it's comic book, but also the writing is in Farsi, and sometimes the writing tends to get very humorous, so that only some Iranians who speak Farsi, they can understand it, and it's kind of like a codish language that they can share and have fun with it among themselves. And it comes in 4 volumes, and the major themes in Shahnameh, some of the major battles, like battle between Rostam and his son Sohrab, and also Siavash, the martyrdom of Siavash. These are like 2 stories here. And I can say that the themes that they cover, they're pretty much some of the major themes in Shahnameh. And although it's not the interpretation of Shahnameh, but it seems that they're able to, the creators, to stay very true to the original meaning of the stories. These are more images from Shahnameh comic books. Also, as I mentioned, that I like to, in presenting my talk, I also, wherever I can, wanted to point out to influences and comparability of this work and other works in this museum. So just like Shahnameh comic book, there is another comic book about Ramayana that was designed by Sanjay Patel. It's also the Maharaja exhibition right now that is going on in Asian Art Museum. We see his animation all over the museum. And if you haven't seen it, it's still on display, Maharaja and me. I heard his video, the interview with Sanjay, and he mentioned that he was growing up, Indian growing up in America. He felt always that he was very different. So he went back to India, and he thought that he feels totally at home there. When he went there, he realized that, in fact, he just is an outsider there too. So he decided to just delve into his ancient roots, and that started the idea of animation for him about the epic of Ramayana. It seems that it's the perfect mixture of old, content in new form to make this the art of work that maybe has lost its fame to new generation, and it has been successful in the way that we live in this internet and social media time. I know that the Shahnameh comic books now, they have been very well read in all over the world. Wherever there are Persians living, they have been well responded. These are more images from Maharaja. And this is the summary of my talk today. Shahnameh is Iranian national epic. Ferdowsi composed Shahnameh in 11th century AD, CE, and it memorializes the history of pre-Islamic Iran. The dominant identity in this portion of Shahnameh is Persian and Zoroastrian. The miniature illustration of Shahnameh in Safavid era, the Iranian identity, Iranians are Persian and Shia Islam. Then we going forward to Shahnameh comic books, Iranian American and the global culture, and how everything has become more like collage, and we can see that in a way how everything is turning around, starting from Ferdowsi in 11th century, how somehow this Shahnameh still remains the medium through which cultural identity still happens, brings people back to their own identity and takes them back to their roots. And that's all I had to say. I'd like to hear your comments and your questions. Thank you.